3 myths about self-improvement that's keeping you stuck. And the last one is an absolute game changer. So when I first started out as a therapist, I remember I had one session that went absolutely horrible. I remember I had a client who was going through a lot. They were working in transportation and they experienced a lot of trauma when they were growing up. But in their current life, they were experiencing a lot of trauma. They actually experienced sexual abuse, had a stalker, right? Like it was everything that you have seen in a movie. And I remember they came to me and their life was just abysmal. They were even about to get evicted from their home. And I remember listening to this client and I remember I was thinking, okay, I got to give them a lot of empathy. I got to be very understanding. I got to talk to them, let them express themselves, right? I was doing everything that you think a therapist should do, but there's one thing that I forgot to do. I forgot to actually give them the techniques because one day she actually went through something very, very tough. And I can't go into detail about what it was, but essentially her life just blew up. And I remember she came to the session feeling very frustrated. She was actually tearing up, very hysterical during the session. And I remember at that time, I was like, oh, like you should use this technique, this, and that. But by then it was too late. Her life was already a mess. And as a result, she actually quit therapy because she thought it wasn't working. And when I saw this, it hit me. It hit me that I wasn't doing therapy the correct way because I was thinking, hey, I just needed to talk to them, give them empathy, let them express how they feel. And that's a part of therapy. But a big part of it is actually giving them techniques. Now, this goes into the first myth about self-improvement because a lot of people believe that self-improvement is all about knowing what to do, and that is the biggest myth. Self-improvement is all about doing what you're supposed to do. It's not about knowing, but it's all about doing what you're supposed to do. Here's the thing, guys. There's a big gap between knowing and doing, and the bigger the gap, the bigger the stress you're going to have in your life, right? The bigger the depression and the bigger the disappointment is going to be in your life. But if you can close that gap between having a thought and taking action, you'll be able to find yourself feeling not only confident, but having the success and dreams that you're looking for. Now, I'm willing to bet that you've read enough self-help books. You've gone to enough conferences. You heard enough speeches, right? Like you know what to do. And this is where I tell people like, hey, like now is the time where you just pick one technique, one thing that you've learned, and now you need to implement it. You know, for you, you may have so many self-help books on your shelf, right? And if you look behind me, you'll see I have a few myself. This year, I told myself there's only a few books that I'm willing to reread. And that's something that I want you guys to get back into. Reread some of the books that you've read, and I guarantee you're going to come across new information or information that you forgot that if you now implement, it'll change everything. There's this last 20% that you're missing, and that last 20% is going to change the rest of your life. But here's the thing. You got to do it. It's one thing to know what to do, but you got to do the doing. So what does this mean for you? My challenge for you is to pick one self-help book that you've already read. Pick one technique that you've been told to do. Pick one conference that you've gone to and go back through your notes. And I want you to go and do one of those things for the next 12 months, right? So for me, I'm going back to Atomic Habits because it's by far the highest quoted book in all of my therapy sessions. And one technique that I really love is the 2-minute technique. Basically what James Clear, the author, states is that if there's a task that you're struggling to do, focus on doing it for only those first 2 minutes. And if that's all you have, great job. But the goal is that you start off doing 2 minutes and then maybe you bump it up to 3, maybe it's 5, then you find yourself at 10, 15. Now you're able to do something that's maybe very hard for an hour. So something like going to the gym, maybe reading a book or whatever the case it may be. But you got to start off small. So the first big myth that's keeping you stuck when it comes to your self-improvement is that you think self-improvement is all about knowing what to do, but self-improvement is all about doing what you're supposed to do. Myth number 2, and this one's going to slap you in the face because it slapped me in my face as well. But myth number 2, self-improvement is like riding a bike. I remember when I was about 7 years old, my dad bought me and my other siblings all bikes. And this was the first time we ever had a bike. And I remember my bike was yellow and it had these red flames and it was like the absolute best thing that I ever had. And I remember he took us all in the front yard and he started teaching us how to ride a bike. And for me, I'll be honest, it took me maybe like a day to figure out how to ride a bike. My dad said I was a quick learner. So it took me a day to learn how to ride a bike. But I remember this one instance. I remember I was going down the street and I was trying to turn into the driveway. And I remember I was coming to the curve. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, like how do I turn this bike? Because if not, I'm going to crash, right? And I remember when I got to the curve, I didn't know how to brake, and I went face forward into the curve, and I did a flip, man. I flipped into the grass, scraped up my arm, scraped up my knee, and I was like, man, I don't want to ride a bike no more, right? Like, I'm out here getting cut up. But I remember after that day, I remember that from then on, I knew how to break. I knew how to break because I knew my life kind of depended on it, right? And to this day, I still know how to ride a bike. But what's funny about that is that I haven't rode a bike in over 10 years. And in over 10 years, to this day, very confidently, I can tell you that I know how to ride a bike. So like, what does all this mean, right? Well, how is this different from self-improvement? Well, when it comes to self-improvement, if you take 10 years off of being a great public speaker, if you take 10 years off knowing how to build habits, if you take 10 years off of being a leader, trust me when I say you're not going to pick up where you left off. That's why the saying is, it's kind of like riding a bike. Once you learn it, you know it. Self-improvement is not like that. And this is going to go back to my first point. There's a good chance that you know what to do and you've done it and you've moved on. But what you guys need to do is make sure that you're always going back to the basics. That's why I'm going back to the book Atomic Habits. There's a book, I want to say even your last book. I would love to actually know what your last book was. So please comment below. What was the last book you read? For me, it is Be Your Future Self by Benjamin Hardy. So go back to your last book. Again, comment below what it is. And I would love for you guys to go and read it and implement some of those things. Because here's the thing, if you don't keep practicing, you will forget it. And that is the biggest myth. People think that once they acquire a skill, they can now go on to a new skill. Very rarely is it that you need to learn a new skill to overcome what you're going through right now. There's a good chance that what you're going through right now, you need to just remember what you've already learned. There's something that you've read, studied, practiced, implemented, probably even at a high level. If you were to go back to that, the problems that you're going through right now, I guarantee you'll be able to solve it. So what does this mean for you? Well, 3 things. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Okay. So I want you guys to go back and just be a big repeater. Don't worry about learning new stuff, because here's the thing. People are always claiming that there's this new way to build habits, new way to build leadership, new way to do public speaking. But trust me, the old stuff still works. The foundational pieces, they still work. And before you guys move on to something new, go back to the old stuff and become very proficient at it. And trust me, if you stay at that level, you'll be able to surpass a lot of people who have switched over to new things before they actually became an expert at the old stuff. And myth number 3, the final myth that I have, is that self-improvement will eliminate your pain for the rest of your life. That is the biggest myth. And the reason why is because self-improvement is not about getting rid of pain or eliminating it, right? We can claim those as being bonuses, right? Because if that happens, great. But self-improvement is all about helping you to embrace that pain. It's all about giving you the strength to be with that pain so you can continue living your life. Now, here's something that a lot of people do not understand when it comes to pain. And it's the fact that pain actually highlights your purpose. Without purpose, there can be no pain. And without pain, there can be no purpose. One of the greatest examples of this is when you go to a funeral. When you're at a funeral, if you're not crying, if you're not tearing up, one could question, did you have love for this person that passed? The reason why you're crying is because this person that you love is no longer there, right? They're no longer physically accessible to you, right? They're still there in the spiritual sense and in terms of your memories and things like that. But in terms of the physical sense, you can't necessarily touch them, feel them, and things like that, right? Would bring a lot of sorrow and heartbreak to a lot of people. You know, just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I went to a funeral. Good friend of mine, coworker, passed, but he was the brightest thing that you ever seen. As a matter of fact, his funeral was so big that we had to have it in an auditorium, right? Like, that's how big it was. Now, here's the thing. I looked in that auditorium and I saw nothing but weeping eyes, saw nothing but people crying, right? It wasn't a dry eye in the whole place. And to me, that says that there was a lot of purpose that this person lived with, right? Because he was able to leave that impact, a lot of people naturally were sad. The pain that you experience, right? It could be pain of loss. It could be pain of a breakup. It could be pain of regret, whatever it is. I want you to be able to stop and ask yourself, what does this pain tell me that I deeply care about? What does this pain tell me that I want in my life? Because if you stopped and looked at that loss, that failure, that rejection, you'll see that there was a dream that was missed, but it does not mean that you can never go back and try it and have it again. You know, what's funny about this, I had a great conversation with a recent client of mine, and I basically told him the reason why he's afraid to try this new task that he's trying, right? So it's a business venture. The reason why he's afraid to go that path, right? The reason why he's feeling that pain of anxiety is because he cares about winning in this area of his life so much, because it means so much to him. And to fail at something that you deeply care about will bring a lot of heartache, right? And for me, that's telling me that this is something that he should go for. So what I'm trying to say here is 2 things again. Self-improvement. The biggest myth is that self-improvement will eliminate the pain for the rest of your life. Totally false, right? Self-improvement is all about helping you to have the strength to embrace this pain. And the second thing about pain is that pain is not bad. Pain shows us, it's like a flashlight that shows us everything that we care about. Because again, without no pain, there can be no purpose. And without purpose, there can be no pain. So what does this mean for you guys? Well, when you're focusing on your self-improvement, do not focus on, let's say, the effectiveness of the self-improvement. What I mean by that is whether or not you don't experience pain or not, right? For a lot of people, they have a very black or white way of looking at things. Self-improvement can very well be categorized as this. It's when you're able to go through a problem, overcome it, and still become successful, right? Because through that journey, you actually learn something about yourself. So what I'm gonna do right quick, I'm gonna go over these 3 points that I just made when it comes to self-improvement and the 3 myths. So myth number 1 about self-improvement is that it's not about knowing how to develop yourself, right? Or to redevelop yourself. It's about doing the development, right? It's all about doing the redevelopment of yourself, because a lot of people know what to do, but very few people do the doing. And that is the biggest myth. The second myth that I went over is that self-improvement is like riding a bike. Totally false. When you ride a bike, when you learn it, you got it. You don't need to go back and relearn how to ride a bike. But when it comes to something like, let's say building habits, right? Or let's say public speaking, or let's say being a leader, right? All these different things are things that you actually have to continue to learn, continue to develop. And that's the biggest myth, is that once you learn it, you don't have to go back to it. That's a big myth. And the third myth that I just went over is that self-improvement will eliminate your pain for the rest of your life. That is a big myth. And one could say having pain in your life is actually an indication that you're actually doing something with your life. There are some people that are totally avoiding all the pain, all the heartache, all the tough stuff. And as a result, they find themselves dealing with something different, something worse than pain, and that's suffering. And to kind of end this, wrap up that last point, I'll use a quote that you've heard. Someone once said, "It's better to have loved and lost than to have never have loved at all." And that's all about being able to embrace pain. So with that being said, this is Coach Wells. I'm a licensed therapist, and thanks for checking out this podcast.